Welcome back another story. In a remote corner of the African continent, nestled at the edge of an ancient forest whose roots whispered secrets older than time, there was a village named Baal. The village was small but vibrant, known for its sacred rituals, colorful storytelling nights, and its deep connection with the spirits of the land. Life here moved with the rhythm of nature, rains that came when needed, crops that grew tall and green, and children who played under the protective shadows of giant baobab trees. Among these children, none shone brighter than a girl named Zuri. Zuri was the daughter of Emily, a revered herbalist and midwife whose knowledge of plants and healing had saved countless lives. But it wasn't just lineage that made Zuri special. From the time she was born, elders said the spirits had smiled upon her. She was a gentle soul with laughter like music, and eyes that held a quiet wisdom far beyond her years. But her most extraordinary feature was her hair, long, thick, and jet black, with a strange shimmer that seemed to dance in the sunlight. It was no ordinary hair. It was said to possess the blessings of her late mother, who had passed away when Zuri was still a child. Emily, before her death, had whispered to her daughter that her hair was a gift from the ancestors, a vessel of protection and healing. The villagers quickly came to believe in the magic woven into Zuri's strands. When a child was ill, a single lock of her hair braided into cloth and worn close to the chest brought recovery. Crops grew greener when Zuri walked between the fields, her hair brushing the tall stalks like the wind's fingers. Women who had struggled to bear children touched her braids and later swore it was Zuri's blessing that gave them life. Zuri never claimed to be powerful. She simply smiled and gave what she could, never asking for anything in return. But not everyone saw her with kindness. Bako, her stepfather, had entered their lives after Emily's passing. He was a broad-shouldered man with eyes that rarely softened and a voice that demanded more than it asked. At first, he acted like a man who only wished to protect a motherless girl. But with time, his kindness faded like morning mist, replaced by silence, impatience, and dark glances. Bako could not understand the reverence the village showed Zuri. In his mind, she was just a girl, one whose light overshadowed him. He was the husband of the great Emily, yet now it was her daughter they honored. Each time a villager bowed to Zuri or whispered thanks after touching her hair, a slow, burning fire stirred in Bako's chest. He began to see her hair not as a blessing but as a threat to him. It was the source of her influence, the reason she commanded attention that should have been his. He watched as the people came to her, listened to her gentle voice, and followed her with faith he could never inspire. Bako was not just jealous. He was afraid of being forgotten, afraid that a girl with sacred hair would one day become more powerful than he had ever hoped to be. And in that fear, something twisted began to grow. As the seasons passed, Zuri's presence in the village became more than just comforting. It became essential. People began to look to her not only for healing but for wisdom, for signs, for hope. The village elders, once the sole bearers of tradition and counsel, started to invite Zuri to sit with them during discussions, asking for her insight on matters both spiritual and practical. Though she was still a teenager, her voice carried the calm certainty of someone deeply in tune with the unseen forces that govern life. Whenever a child was born, the mother would request that Zuri be the first to touch the baby's head, believing her hands would bless the newborn's path. Farmers began waiting for her to walk through their fields before planting, and young girls braided charms into their hair, hoping to mirror her beauty and favor. It was not just her hair they revered, it was the presence that came with it, a kind of grace that made even the most skeptical old men nod in quiet respect. But not everyone celebrated her growing influence. Bako watched this rise with increasing bitterness. Once he had been treated as a man of importance for marrying Emily, the village's beloved healer. But after her passing, he found himself slipping into the shadows. Now with Zuri becoming the beacon of the people's faith, Bako felt invisible. At first, it was small things that bothered him. A villager asking for Zuri instead of him to help with a ritual, a child laughing at his clumsy attempts to mimic her calming presence. But soon, that irritation hardened into something sharper, something poisonous. He began to resent every gesture of respect she received. Her hair, once merely a symbol of her beauty, became a constant reminder of his own irrelevance. In his eyes, Zuri wasn't special, she was just lucky. He convinced himself that it was all an illusion, a trick of heritage and superstition. And more importantly, he began to believe that whatever power the villagers thought she had, it wasn't hers by right. It was something that could be taken. It was during the dry season that Zuri's grandmother, long weakened by grief and age, grew ill. She had never fully recovered from Emily's death and had become increasingly withdrawn. When the fever took hold, Zuri stayed at her side, weaving cool leaves into cloths and whispering soothing chants to ease her pain. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with amber light, her grandmother stirred with a final burst of strength. She reached out, her voice rasping like the wind through dry grass. "Zuri, child of my heart, promise me one thing, never cut your hair. It carries more than memory. It is your soul's thread to the mothers before us. Protect it always." Zuri held her grandmother's hand tightly, tears streaking her cheeks, and nodded with a trembling whisper, "I promise." Unbeknownst to them, Bako stood outside the hut listening. He had come to check on the old woman, perhaps with a show of concern, but what he heard chilled him. If the hair truly held such power, perhaps it was more than just a symbol. Perhaps it was real. The seed of jealousy bloomed into something darker, desire, not for Zuri's good but for his gain. In the days that followed, Bako noticed villagers talking in hushed tones, speaking of Zuri's grandmother's final words. "Her hair is the last link to Emily's line," one said. "They say even the ancestors speak through it," whispered another. That was all it took. In Bako's mind, her hair was not just a threat anymore. It was a weapon he could use or destroy. Either way, it had to be taken from her. The night air was thick and still, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. The moon hung low, its silver light casting pale shadows through the open windows of the small clay hut where Zuri slept. Her chest rose and fell softly, her long magical hair spilling over the edge of her woven mat like a river of black silk. Each strand shimmered faintly, touched by the quiet energy of the ancestors. Outside, the village was silent, except for the quiet footsteps of a man who moved like a shadow. Bako entered the hut without a sound. He stood over Zuri for a long moment, staring at her as she slept, her face peaceful and unaware of the betrayal that loomed above her. In one hand, he held a curved knife, dull and rusted at the edges, yet sharp enough for the task he had planned. In the other hand, a small sack where he meant to hide what he took. His face was grim, his eyes hollow, stripped of remorse. All he could see was what he believed had been taken from him: respect, attention, power, and all of it, he thought, lived in that hair. With a trembling hand, he reached down and grabbed a handful of it. The knife flashed once, then again and again, slicing through the strands. Piece by piece, Zuri's sacred locks fell to the ground. She stirred once in her sleep, murmured softly but didn't wake. When he was done, Bako stood over the shorn figure of the girl and looked at the pile of hair with something like triumph and a touch of fear, as if he already knew that some line had been crossed that could never be returned from. He didn't stop there. Moving quickly, he crept into the woods beyond the village and lit a small fire in a hidden clearing. One by one, he fed the strands of hair into the flames. They did not burn like ordinary hair. They hissed and sparked, the fire briefly flaring with unnatural blue and gold light. The wind stirred, though no storm had been forecast. Somewhere in the distance, a lone owl let out a sharp cry, as though warning the world that something sacred had just been defiled. By morning, Zuri awoke to silence and the cold brush of her scalp against the mat. She sat up slowly, confusion giving way to horror as her hands touched her head and found nothing. Her once long, enchanted hair was gone, shorn completely, uneven and raw. She cried out, not just in grief, but in spiritual agony. It felt as if her soul had been carved away in the night. Her grandmother, barely able to rise from her mat, looked at Zuri with wide, broken eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek and she turned her face to the wall. She said nothing, not because she didn't care, but because something inside her had shattered beyond words. It was as though the flame that kept her alive flickered for the last time. Bako entered moments later, his voice calm but cold. "It had to be done," he said, ignoring Zuri's sobs. "You were becoming too proud. You forgot who you are and who you belong to." Word spread quickly through the village. When the people saw Zuri, hairless and fragile, many turned their eyes away in shock and confusion. Some believed she had disrespected tradition. Others whispered that her powers were gone, that the spirits had abandoned her. Fearful and confused, they turned on her. The same villagers who once sought her blessings now shunned her. By sundown, the decision had been made. Zuri was no longer welcome. They cast her out, telling her she had broken the sacred promise, that she had lost the gift of her ancestors. Alone and exiled, Zuri walked away from the village with nothing but her tears and the faint, fatting warmth of her grandmother's final gaze. The forest was a world of whispers and shadows. Trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their branches creaking with age. The night air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of moss and the distant murmur of unseen creatures. Zuri had found a place beneath the wide canopy of an Irako tree where the roots curled like fingers into the earth. She wrapped herself in a shawl of dried leaves in silence, the pain of betrayal pressing on her chest like a stone. Her scalp still tingled, raw and unfamiliar, and her heart felt like it had been hollowed out. She lay there, eyes wide open to the darkness, waiting for sleep to take her, or for the forest to do so instead. When she finally drifted off, it was not into rest but into something far stranger. She found herself standing in a vast glowing field. The grass beneath her feet shimmered silver and gold, and the sky above was not sky at all but a swirling tapestry of stars and shapes that pulsed like a heartbeat. Everything around her glowed softly, as if lit from within. The air was warm and humming with life. She turned slowly, and there, rising from a mist of light, came her mother. Emily looked young again, her hair flowing like a river of stardust, her eyes deep as the ocean. She smiled, but her smile was not sad. It was knowing. "Zuri," she said, her voice echoing not through ears but through the bones of the earth itself. "Daughter of root and rain, you have suffered, but your spirit has not broken." Zuri's voice trembled. "Mama, my hair, it's gone. They took it. They turned away from me." Emily reached out, her hand passing through Zuri, as if made of wind and fire. "What is cut may grow again," she said softly, her eyes shining. "But what is stolen shall return tenfold." Zuri frowned, not understanding. "What does it mean?" "Your gift is not in what they saw," her mother whispered. "It is what they feared. The roots run deeper than the eye can see. They tried to sever you, but they only awakened what lies within." The light around her mother began to grow brighter, swirling faster, and Zuri felt herself being pulled upward like leaves in a storm. Her mother's final words echoed as everything faded. "You are not broken, my child. You are becoming." Zuri awoke with a gasp. The forest was still, the fireflies hovering in a ring around her like tiny stars. She sat up, heart pounding, breath unsteady. Then she felt it, an odd tingling at the base of her neck. Slowly, cautiously, she reached up. Her fingertips touched something soft, something pulsing gently with warmth. Where once there had been only bare scalp, there were now tiny roots, strands of hair, glowing faintly like embers in the night. Not black, but streaked with gold and deep green, as if the forest itself had begun to grow from within her. Zuri stared into the darkness, not afraid, not broken, but full of something new, something ancient and wild and rising. As dawn stretched its golden fingers across the treetops, the forest stirred to life. Birds broke the silence with gentle songs, and the trees rustled softly as if whispering secrets to one another. Zuri awoke under the same Irako tree, but something felt different. The weight in her chest was lighter. The air around her felt charged with a quiet hum. She sat up slowly, her senses sharper than ever before. The fluttering of wings, the trembling of leaves, even the heartbeat of the earth beneath her, seemed louder, more intimate. Then she felt it again, that warmth at her scalp, deeper now, blooming like fire beneath her skin. She reached up and gasped. Her hair had returned. But it was not as it once was. No longer the simple, elegant black strands that once cascaded down her back. This new hair shimmered with life. Threads of gold ran through it like veins of sunlight, entwined with deep earthy greens and soft browns, like vines grown in moonlight. The strands moved slightly as if they were alive, dancing in the morning breeze even when the air was still. It didn't simply hang from her scalp. It grew wild and radiant, as if it were being woven, moment, by some ancient, invisible hand. As she stood, the ground responded. Tiny green shoots burst through the soil wherever her bare feet touched. Flowers budded from the forest floor and opened in full bloom in seconds, vibrant and full of color. Trees that had been still moments ago stretched their branches toward her, and the grass bent in her direction like worshippers bowing at a shrine. Then came the animals. One by one, they emerged from the forest. A silver-backed antelope stepped carefully into the clearing and bowed its head. Monkeys swung low from the trees and sat in a half-circle, watching silently with wide, curious eyes. A mother elephant with her calf appeared from behind a line of tall reeds, raising her trunk as if to greet her. Even the birds, dozens of them, perched along the branches above, chirping softly, forming a living canopy of color and song. Zuri stood among them, overwhelmed but not afraid. She felt something awaken in her chest, a sense of wholeness, of power, not based in pride but in purpose. It wasn't just her hair that had changed, she had changed. Her heartbeat seemed to echo in harmony with the rhythm of the forest. The grief she had carried for days melted into the ground, absorbed by the roots of the trees, replaced by something ancient and comforting. Just beyond the clearing, an old woman had been watching. She was cloaked in a robe the color of red clay, her hair wrapped in patterned cloth, her staff made of dark twisted wood. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes never leaving Zuri. The animals did not move. They simply made room for the woman as she approached. She stopped a few feet from Zuri and studied her with the careful eyes of someone who had seen many lifetimes. "You walk as one reborn," the woman said, her voice deep and textured like water flowing over stone. Zuri nodded, unsure what to say. The woman reached out and touched a lock of her glowing hair. Her hand trembled slightly. "This is no ordinary gift," she murmured. "This is the blessing of she who births the earth, the great mother spirit. You are of her line now, a vessel of her will. Do you know what that means?" Zuri hesitated, then answered softly, "I think I'm starting to." The woman smiled. "Then come, child. The world will ask much of you now, but first you must learn who you truly are." She turned and motioned for Zuri to follow. As they walked, the forest parted before them, a path unfolding with every step. More animals followed behind, and the plants continued to bloom in their wake. Zuri didn't look back. She no longer felt the weight of exile or the sting of betrayal. Her journey was just beginning, but already the earth had begun to answer her call. Under the guidance of the old healer, who introduced herself as Nia, keeper of the forgotten ways, Zuri began to understand the vastness of what had awakened inside her. They lived in a quiet grove hidden deep within the forest, where the trees grew in spirals and water flowed in streams that shimmered like glass. Nia taught her to listen, truly listen, not with her ears but with her spirit. "The earth does not speak in words," Nia told her one morning as they knelt by a spring surrounded by moss and wildflowers. It speaks in rhythm, in feeling, in memory, and now it speaks through you. Each day Zuri trained. She placed her hands on dying plants and felt their roots stir awake. She closed her eyes beside the sick and watched light pour from her palms, chasing away the shadow of disease. Birds brought her seeds from far places, and when she planted them, they grew with impossible speed, bearing fruit in days instead of months. She moved with the grace of wind and the calm of flowing water. Where once she had been led by fear and uncertainty, now she moved with purpose. The animals remained close, walking beside her like old friends. Even the trees seemed to lean in when she passed. But more than anything, Zuri had changed within. Her magic was no longer bound to her hair. Though her locks now flowed again, wild, glowing, alive, it was not the source of her power. That had always lived inside her. It was her spirit that carried the blessing, and now she had fully become its vessel. Word of her miracles traveled far beyond the grove. Wandering, hunters returned to their villages, speaking of a glowing girl who turned dry fields into green oceans. A traveling merchant claimed his daughter, on the brink of death, had been saved by a girl with vines around her wrists and stars in her hair. The elders of Baal, her old village, began to hear the stories too. Of Zuri, the girl they had cast out, now revered as something far greater than before. Some called her the Spirit Walker. Others whispered that she was no longer mortal at all, but a child of the forest gods. But to those who had seen her, who had felt the warmth of her touch, the bloom of life in her footsteps, there was no doubt. The girl they had once called hairless now carried the power of the land itself. Zuri, once broken and betrayed, had become something more than the village had ever imagined. Not a vessel of inherited magic, not a relic of her mother's legacy, but a spirit reborn in her own right. She had risen from pain with the strength of the earth beneath her, the sky above her, and the ancestors within her. In this time, no one could take that from her. The sun burned mercilessly over the once thriving village of Baal. The river had thinned to a muddy trickle. The fields were cracked and lifeless, and the children coughed with the dryness of dust in their throats. A strange sickness had crept into the hearts of the villagers, fear, regret, and a shadow that seemed to choke the life from everything. The elders gathered one morning, their voices weighed down with guilt and desperation. "We cast out the one who could help us," one said quietly. "We turned our backs on the child of our land," whispered another. At last, with heads bowed and hearts heavy, they decided what they must do. They would seek Zuri, they would beg for forgiveness. When Zuri heard the cries from the forest's edge, the weak voices calling her name, she stepped from the grove with Nia at her side. Her hair glowed softly, her presence calm and steady. The villagers fell to their knees. "We were blind," an elder wept. "Forgive us, child, help us heal our home." Zuri looked at them, her heart softening. Though she had been betrayed, though she had been cast out, she saw their fear and suffering. She stepped forward and placed her hands on the cracked earth. The ground trembled, light poured through her fingers. The soil softened, darkened, and breathed again. Water surged from beneath the earth, filling the riverbed with clear, cold life. Crops rose like green waves. The wind seemed to sigh with relief. Children laughed again as the dust lifted. Mothers cried with gratitude. The men and women of the village bowed, not in worship but in respect. "I forgive you," Zuri said, rising once more. "But let this be your lesson. Never again turn away from one of your own. Never again let fear guide your hands." In the weeks that followed, Baal changed. A new structure was built near the sacred grove, a place of learning, of spirit, and of growth. It was not a temple nor a shrine. It was a school, and they named it the House of Roots and Light. Here, children came to learn not only about the ancestors in the earth but about harmony, healing, and balance. They studied the plants, the animals, the rhythms of nature, and they learned the story of a girl whose hair was taken, but whose spirit could not be broken. Zuri did not rule the village like a queen. She walked among her people as a guide, a healer, and a teacher. Her voice became the drumbeat of Baal's renewal, the wind that rustled the trees, the quiet strength that held the community together. And though her hair never again grew long like before, no one ever spoke of it with sorrow. For they knew now, power was not in what the eye could see. It lived in the roots, in the spirit, and in the heart of the girl who became the forest's voice. The tale of Zuri teaches us that true beauty and power are never found in what the eye can see alone. They lie within the quiet strength of the soul, the courage to rise after betrayal, and the wisdom to forgive even when forgiveness is not deserved. Zuri's hair, once seen as the source of her magic, was only a symbol. Her real gift was her spirit, resilient, pure, and deeply rooted in the love of her ancestors and the rhythms of nature. Through her journey, we are reminded that jealousy is a poison. It clouds vision, turns blessings into burdens, and causes people to destroy what they do not understand. But faith, humility, and a heart open to truth can restore what is lost, often in ways more powerful and meaningful than before. Zuri's return to her village not only healed the land but awakened her people. She showed them that traditions must evolve, that wisdom can live in the young, and that nature speaks through those willing to listen. The harmony between spirit, self, and earth is sacred, and those who honor it will always find their way home, even after the storm.